Airport staff kicked out a poor farmer, but regretted when the owner arrived. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the gleaming floors of Metropolitan International Airport as Harold Shin made his way through the automatic doors. At 82 years old, his weathered hands gripped a gnarled walking stick, each step deliberate and measured. The stick wasn't just for show. Decades of working the land had left their mark on his joints, each step a quiet reminder of the countless dawns he'd greeted in his fields. His appearance stood in stark contrast to the sleek, modern interior of the airport. While business travelers hurried past in press suits and tourists wandered by in comfortable travel wear, Harold wore what he'd always worn: faded overalls with patches at the knees, a checkered shirt that had seen better days, and work boots that told stories of countless seasons in the fields. A small, worn leather bag hung from his shoulder, containing little more than a change of clothes and his reading glasses. But there was something else about Harold that no one could see, something that twinkled in his eyes as he observed the bustling scene around him. Behind that facade of a simple farmer lay a purpose, a test he'd carefully planned with his grandson, Michael, the owner of this very airport. The same grandson who'd grown up spending summers on his farm, learning the value of hard work and, more importantly, the worth of treating every human being with dignity. "Sir, would you like some assistance?" a young mother asked kindly, noticing his slow pace. Harold smiled warmly but shook his head. "Thank you, dear, but I need to find my own way today." The woman nodded and moved on, unaware that her simple act of kindness had already been noted in Harold's mental ledger. As he shuffled deeper into the terminal, his keen eyes took in everything: the way the staff interacted with first-class passengers, how they handled frustrated travelers, their behavior toward the elderly couple struggling with their luggage. Each observation was carefully filed away, each interaction scrutinized. He'd spent his life reading weather patterns and soil conditions. Now he was reading something far more complex: human nature. Harold approached the information desk, intentionally letting his walking stick scrape against the floor. He'd carefully chosen his moment. The terminal was busy enough to create stress but not so crowded that chaos could excuse poor behavior. The designer clothes and premium luggage around him made his worn appearance stand out even more starkly. A group of junior executives gave him a wide berth, their noses wrinkling slightly as they passed. Harold suppressed a smile, remembering how his grandson Michael had started exactly the same way, turning up his nose at the smell of manure and honest sweat. It had taken a full summer of farm work to teach him that true value lay beneath the surface, whether in soil or in people. The weight of his fake ID pressed against his chest in his shirt pocket. Michael had insisted on this detail, making sure his grandfather had a completely different identity for this test. "Just in case," Michael had said, his face serious during their planning session. "We need to see how they treat regular people, not just VIPs." Harold had agreed, though the subterfuge felt strange to a man who'd lived his entire life in straightforward honesty. As he moved through the terminal, he could feel eyes following him, some curious, some dismissive, some clearly wondering if he was lost or confused. Little did they know that every glance, every whispered comment, every subtle reaction was being carefully observed and remembered by a mind that remained as sharp as the blade of a new plow. He spotted the first rail test approaching, a busy security checkpoint where staff efficiency and attitude would be clearly displayed. Harold deliberately slowed his pace even further, knowing that his presence would soon force the staff to make a choice. Would they see the human being beneath the worn clothes and weathered appearance, or would they simply see an inconvenience to their day? The morning light streaming through the huge terminal windows caught the silver of his hair, creating a brief halo effect that no one seemed to notice. Harold Shin, farmer, grandfather, and secret owner's proxy, stood at the threshold of his experiment, ready to uncover whether his grandson's airport truly served all people equally, or if it had become another place where worth was measured by appearance and privilege. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just the airport's future, but the lives of everyone involved. Harold tightened his grip on his walking stick, said a silent prayer for wisdom, and stepped forward into what would become one of the most remarkable days in Metropolitan International Airport's history. The first sign of trouble came at the information desk. Harold approached the counter where Sarah Martinez, a staff member of 3 years, was scrolling through her phone. She didn't bother looking up until his walking stick tapped against the desk's metal base. "Excuse me," Harold said softly. "Could you direct me to gate B15? Sarah glanced up, her perfectly lined eyes narrowing at the sight of his worn clothes. "There are signs everywhere," she said, waving vaguely toward the ceiling. "Just follow those." She immediately returned to her phone, dismissing him without another word. Harold stood there for a moment longer. "I'm afraid my eyesight isn't what it used to be," he explained patiently. "Would you mind?" "Look," Sarah cut him off, exhaling sharply. "We're not a nursing home. If you can't read the signs, maybe you shouldn't be traveling alone." She caught the eye of her colleague, Tom Baker, and rolled her eyes dramatically. Tom sauntered over, his security badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing the question to Sarah rather than Harold. "Just another one trying to waste our time," Sarah replied. "Probably looking for somewhere warm to hang out." The word stung, but Harold maintained his composure. "I'm a ticketed passenger," he said, reaching for the ticket in his pocket. "I just need some assistance." "Sure you are," Tom smirked. "And I'm the Queen of England." He turned to his radio. "Dave, we've got a situation at the main information desk. Code Gray." In airport security parlance, Code Gray was used to signal a suspicious elderly person, a code that was supposed to ensure gentle handling of seniors. Today, it would be used very differently. Within minutes, 2 more security officers arrived, Dave Wilson and Mark Thompson. They flanked Harold, their stance aggressive rather than protective. "Sir, if you don't have a valid reason to be here, you'll need to leave," Dave announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. A small crowd had begun to gather, their reactions ranging from discomfort to indifference. A businessman in an expensive suit actually chuckled, muttering something about keeping the riffraff out to his companion. A young mother pulled her child closer, as if poverty might be contagious. "I have a ticket," Harold insisted, finally managing to pull it from his pocket. "Right here." Mark snatched the ticket from his hand, examining it with exaggerated skepticism. "This could be fake," he declared without really looking at it. "We get people trying to pull scams all the time." "I'm not trying to," Harold began, but Dave cut him off with a rough grab of his arm. "That's enough. We're escorting you out." The security officer's grip tightened painfully. Harold's walking stick clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the suddenly quiet terminal. A young woman in scrubs stepped forward. "Hey, wait a minute," she protested. "You can't just—" "Ma'am, please stay back," Tom warned. "This is a security matter." The nurse hesitated, then stepped back, her face troubled but her intervention silenced. They marched Harold toward the exit, not even allowing him to retrieve his walking stick. Sarah watched from her desk, a satisfied smirk playing across her face as she recorded the scene on her phone, not to document the injustice, but to share what she thought would be an amusing story on her social media later. The automatic doors slid open, letting in a blast of cold morning air. Without ceremony, Dave and Mark pushed Harold out onto the sidewalk. His legs, already unsteady without his walking stick, buckled beneath him. He managed to catch himself on a concrete pillar, barely avoiding a fall. "Next time, try the bus station," Mark sneered. "They're used to your type there." The security officers turned and strode back inside, leaving Harold alone in the cold. Through the glass walls, he could see Sarah and Tom exchanging high fives, laughing at what they clearly thought was a job well done. The young nurse who had tried to intervene was arguing with another staff member, but her protests were being waved away with obvious irritation. Harold settled himself on a cold concrete bench, his joints protesting the rough treatment and bitter morning air. His walking stick lay forgotten somewhere inside, but he knew going back for it would only lead to more confrontation. Instead, he pulled out his phone, not the cheap burner phone they'd expect someone of his apparent status to have, but the latest model his grandson had insisted he carry for emergencies. He didn't use it though. Not yet. The test wasn't complete. First, he needed to see if anyone, any staff member at all, would show a shred of human decency and come to check on him. Inside, he could see the staff returning to their posts, already forgetting about the old man they just humiliated. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb nearby, and Harold allowed himself a small smile. Right on schedule. The real show was about to begin, but first, he counted slowly to 10, giving the security team time to congratulate themselves on what they thought was a successful removal of an unwanted vagrant. They had no idea that their actions in the past 15 minutes had just sealed their fates. Harold touched his aching arm where Dave had grabbed him, knowing it would leave a bruise. His grandson would not be pleased about that, not pleased at all. The car's door opened, and Harold heard familiar footsteps approaching. He didn't turn around. Let them all see what happened next. Let them learn exactly how wrong they'd been to judge a man by his clothes and his age rather than his character. Michelchin stepped out of his black Mercedes, his tailored suit and commanding presence drawing immediate attention from those nearby. At 38, he built Metropolitan International into one of the country's most prestigious airports, earning a reputation for luxury service and efficiency. Today, however, he wasn't here for a routine inspection. He was right on schedule for the carefully orchestrated test he'd planned with his grandfather. As he approached the entrance, he noticed the elderly figure sitting alone on the bench. His heart clenched at the sight of his grandfather without his walking stick, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Everything had to play out perfectly for this lesson to stick. "Grandfather?" he called out, loud enough for his voice to carry through the glass doors. "What are you doing out here in the cold?" Inside the terminal, Sarah Martinez's phone slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Tom Baker, who had been lounging at the security desk, straightened so quickly he knocked over his coffee. Through the glass walls, they watched in horror as their boss, the Michelchin, owner of Metropolitan International, helped the vagrant they just expelled to his feet. "Someone want to explain why my grandfather is sitting out here without his walking stick?" Michael's voice cut through the morning air as he guided Harold through the automatic doors. The terminal had fallen deadly silent, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. Dave Wilson, who had so roughly grabbed Harold's arm earlier, had turned an interesting shade of gray. Mark Thompson seemed to be trying to blend into the wall, while Sarah was frantically deleting the mocking social media post she just uploaded. "I believe this belongs to my grandfather," Michael said coldly, spotting Harold's walking stick propped against a wall where it had been discarded. A young janitor rushed to retrieve it, handling the simple wooden stick as if it were made of crystal. "Mr. Chen, sir," Tom started, stepping forward with his hands raised placatingly. "There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea." "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Michael cut him off. "You had no idea who he was, so you felt justified in treating him like garbage." His voice carried through the terminal, where a crowd had gathered, including many who had witnessed Harold's earlier mistreatment. The young nurse who had tried to intervene earlier stepped forward. "Sir, I tried to stop them. They were horrible to him. They wouldn't even look at his ticket properly." Michael nodded gratefully to her before turning back to his staff. "Sarah Martinez?" he called out, making the information desk attendant jump. "Please step forward." Sarah emerged from behind her desk, her designer uniform no longer seeming quite so impressive. "Mr. Chen, please, I can explain. I was watching the security feeds from my car," Michael interrupted. "You recorded my grandfather's humiliation and posted it online for laughs. Is that part of our customer service protocol?" Harold placed a gentle hand on his grandson's arm. "Michael," he said softly, but with clear authority, "perhaps we should continue this in private." "No, grandfather," Michael replied, equally soft but firm. "They made this public when they chose to humiliate you in front of everyone. The lesson should be equally public." He turned back to his assembled staff. "My grandfather worked the land for 60 years. He put me through business school with the sweat of his brow and the strength of his character. He taught me that true worth isn't found in designer clothes or first-class tickets, it's found in how we treat others, especially those we think can't benefit us personally. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek as the full impact of her actions hit her. Tom had removed his security badge and was holding it loosely, already anticipating what was coming. Dave and Mark stood rigid, their earlier arrogance replaced by naked fear. When I bought this airport, Michael continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent terminal, my grandfather gave me one piece of advice. A business is only as good as how it treats its most vulnerable customers. Today, you've shown me that we've failed spectacularly at that most basic principle. He turned to Harold, who stood straight despite his earlier rough treatment. Grandfather, is there anyone here who showed you kindness? Anyone at all? Harold nodded, gesturing to the nurse. This young lady tried to intervene. And there was a janitor, James, I believe his name was, who offered me water when no one else was looking. Michael made mental notes, then addressed the gathered crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you had to witness this today. This is not what Metropolitan International stands for, or rather, it's not what we will stand for moving forward. He turned back to his staff. As for those directly involved in this incident, the tension in the air was palpable as Michael reached into his suit jacket. Instead of termination papers, however, he withdrew his grandfather's real ID, the one that proved he was Harold Chen, not just the owner's grandfather, but the majority shareholder of Metropolitan International Airport. The color drained from every staff member's face as they realized the full magnitude of their mistake. They hadn't just mistreated the owner's grandfather, they'd abused and humiliated the man who actually owned the majority of their workplace. No, Michael said, his voice deadly quiet. I believe we need to have a serious discussion about the future of certain employees at this airport. He gestured toward his private office. Shall we? As the guilty staff members filed toward the office, Harold remained in the terminal, finally accepting his walking stick back from the apologetic janitor. He watched his grandson lead the procession with a mixture of sadness and pride. The lesson had been painful, but necessary. Now came the hard part, ensuring that real change would follow. Inside Michael Chen's executive office, the atmosphere was suffocating. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually offered spectacular views of the runways now felt like they were displaying their shame to the entire world. Sarah Martinez, Tom Baker, Dave Wilson, and Mark Thompson stood in a tight cluster, each avoiding eye contact with both their boss and his grandfather, who sat quietly in a leather armchair, his walking stick resting across his knees. Explain yourselves, Michael said, his voice eerily calm as he leaned against his desk. Who wants to go first? The silence stretched uncomfortably until Tom Baker stepped forward, his security uniform suddenly seeming too tight around his neck. Sir, we were just following protocol for suspicious individuals. In today's climate, we can't be too careful about security. Protocol? Michael interrupted, pulling up a security footage video on his wall-mounted screen. Is it protocol to ignore a valid ticket without properly examining it? Is it protocol to physically manhandle an elderly man? Please show me where that's written in our security manual. But he looked like he didn't belong here. Sarah blurted out, then immediately regretted her words as both Michael and Harold turned to look at her. I mean, we get so many people trying to take advantage, trying to scam travelers or just loiter in the terminal. And how exactly does someone who belongs here look, Ms. Martinez? Harold spoke for the first time, his voice gentle but penetrating. Should every passenger wear designer clothes? Should we turn away anyone whose hand shows signs of honest work? Sarah's mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. Dave Wilson saw an opportunity to shift blame. It was Tom who called the security code, he said quickly. Mark and I were just responding to a superior officer's command. That's a lie. Tom spun to face him. You were the one who grabbed Mr. Chen's arm. I never told you to use physical force. You all seemed quite unified in your actions earlier, Michael observed coldly. Interesting how quickly that unity dissolves when consequences appear. Mark Thompson, who had remained silent until now, suddenly dropped to his knees. Please, Mr. Chen, I have a family. A mortgage. I can't lose this job. I was just following what everyone else was doing. I never meant. Never meant what? Michael cut in. Never meant to treat another human being like they were worthless? Never meant to get caught? Which is it, Mr. Thompson? If I may, Harold interjected, raising a hand. I'd like to know something. When you saw me struggling without my walking stick, did any of you feel any concern at all? Any hint of doubt about your actions? The staff members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, Sarah spoke up, tears streaming down her face. I did. For a moment. But then I thought about all the times we've had to deal with troublemakers, and I convinced myself you were another one. I didn't want to look weak in front of my colleagues. At least that's honest. Harold nodded. The first honest thing you've said all day. Weak? Michael repeated. You think showing basic human decency makes you weak? Tell me, how many actual troublemakers have you dealt with this month? Show me the incident reports. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Well, there haven't been any official incidents, but you decided my grandfather was suspicious based on nothing but his appearance. Michael finished. Do you know what he was doing before he bought this airport with me? He was running one of the most successful organic farms in the state. He put me through business school. He taught me everything I know about treating people with respect. Sir? Dave stepped forward, desperation clear in his voice. We can change. Give us another chance. We'll take any training, any probation period. Like the chance you gave my grandfather? Michael asked quietly. The chance to explain himself? To show you his ticket? To be treated with basic dignity? The security footage continued playing silently on the wall screen, showing their earlier behavior in all its awful detail. Sarah had sunk into a chair, her face in her hands. Tom was tugging at his collar, sweat visible on his forehead. Dave and Mark stood rigid, both men looking like they wanted to disappear into the plush carpet. I've spent the last hour reviewing your past incident reports. Michael continued, picking up a tablet. Interesting pattern. Seems you've had quite a few suspicious individuals, almost all elderly, minorities, or people who appeared to be of lower economic status. Care to explain that pattern? None of them could meet his eyes. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Sarah's quiet sobs. The truly sad thing, Harold said, standing slowly with the help of his walking stick, is that none of you seem to understand that you've not just failed me today. You've failed yourselves. Every person you've mistreated, every soul you've humiliated, they've all taken a piece of your own humanity with them. Michael watched his grandfather speak, reminded of all the lessons this wise man had taught him over the years. He turned back to his staff, his decision clear in his eyes. The time for explanations and justifications was over. Now would come the consequences, and judging by the looks on their faces, they knew it too. You all have families, Michael said quietly. Responsibilities. Dreams. Just like every person who walks through our terminal. Remember that in your next jobs, because your time at Metropolitan International ends today. The news spread through Metropolitan International Airport like wildfire. By afternoon, every employee knew about the morning's events, and the termination of 4 senior staff members sent shockwaves through the entire organization. Michael Chun had called an emergency all-hands meeting in the airport's largest conference room, where hundreds of employees now sat in tense silence. Harold Chun stood beside his grandson at the podium, his presence a powerful reminder of the morning's events. The walking stick that had been so carelessly discarded now rested against the lectern, a humble wooden symbol that had triggered an organizational earthquake. Today's events have exposed the cancer in our organization, Michael began, his voice firm but measured. A cancer of prejudice, discrimination, and casual cruelty that ends now. He gestured to a stack of documents on the podium. I've just signed new policies that will reshape how this airport treats every single person who walks through our doors. A large screen behind him illuminated with statistics that made many employees shift uncomfortably in their seats. Our internal review has revealed a disturbing pattern of discriminatory behavior. In the past year alone, We've had over 200 complaints about staff treating passengers differently based on their appearance, age, or perceived social status. Most of these complaints were ignored or dismissed. The young nurse who had tried to help Harold raised her hand. Sir, some of us have tried to report these incidents before, but our concerns were always dismissed. Michael nodded grimly. That stops today. We're implementing a new anonymous reporting system, and every single complaint will be investigated by an independent ethics committee. He paused, letting that sink in. But more importantly, we're going to address the root cause of this behavior. Harold stepped forward, his voice carrying surprising strength. When I was a young farmer, I learned that you can't just pull out the weeds, you have to enrich the soil itself. Change must come from the ground up. Michael clicked to the next slide, revealing a comprehensive new training program. Starting tomorrow, every employee will undergo mandatory sensitivity and diversity training. But this isn't just about sitting through some videos and checking boxes. We're going to fundamentally change how we operate. He outlined the new measures. Regular mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds would test staff behavior. Bonuses would be tied to customer service metrics that specifically measured equal treatment. A new customer service council would include representatives from various community organizations. Furthermore, Michael continued, we're establishing a scholarship program for disadvantaged youth interested in aviation careers. The airport should reflect the diversity of the community it serves, at all levels of operation. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. Some employees looked inspired, others worried, and a few seemed openly skeptical. Michael raised his hand for silence. I know some of you are thinking this is an overreaction to one incident. Let me be clear, what happened to my grandfather was not an isolated event. It was merely the moment that forced us to confront our failures. Harold stepped forward again, his weathered hands gripping the podium. When I started farming, I had nothing but a piece of land and a dream. People judged me by my calloused hands and worn clothes, just like your colleagues judged me today. But I built something valuable, something lasting, not despite my appearance, but because I knew that true worth lies in actions, not appearances. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on this man who commanded respect not through fancy titles or expensive clothes, but through the quiet dignity of his presence. Your colleagues who were terminated today, Michael continued, they're not evil people. They simply fell into the easy trap of judging books by their covers. But in an airport, a place where the world meets, we cannot afford such shallow thinking. He unveiled the final slide, showing the airport's new mission statement. Metropolitan International, where every journey begins with dignity. Those who cannot embrace this new direction should seek employment elsewhere. Michael stated firmly. Those who stay will be part of building something extraordinary, an airport that truly serves everyone. The consequences didn't stop there. Michael announced that the airport would pay compensation to any passengers who could prove they'd been discriminated against in the past year. A public apology would be issued, acknowledging past failures and committing to change. As the meeting concluded, Harold noticed a group of cleaning staff huddled nervously in the corner. He made his way over to them, ignoring his grandson's concerned look. Sir? One of them began hesitantly. We just wanted to say, we see it every day. The way some passengers treat us, the way some staff ignore us. Thank you for making people notice. Harold smiled, reaching out to shake their hands. Sometimes it takes a storm to clear the air, he said softly. The real test begins now, making sure these changes last. As employees filed out of the conference room, many stopped to shake Harold's hand or offer quiet words of support. The atmosphere in the airport had shifted. There was a sense of something new beginning, a recognition that treating people with dignity wasn't just the right thing to do, it was now a fundamental requirement of working at Metropolitan International. Michael watched his grandfather interacting with the staff, remembering all the lessons he'd learned on the farm years ago. Today's test had been painful but necessary. Now came the real challenge, ensuring that this moment of crisis truly became a catalyst for lasting change. 2 weeks had passed since the incident that had shaken Metropolitan International Airport to its core. The terminal sparkled in the morning light, But it wasn't just the physical appearance that had changed. There was a different energy in the air, a warmth that went beyond the efficient professionalism the airport had once prided itself on. Harold Chen sat in the same spot where he'd been ejected 2 weeks earlier, but this time he was comfortably settled in a newly installed priority seating area. He watched as Janet Wong, a recently hired customer service representative, patiently helped an elderly woman with her heavy luggage. "Please, let me assist you with that," Janet said warmly, not just taking the bags but also offering her arm for support. "Would you like a wheelchair? We keep them right here now, no need to walk to the other end of the terminal." The elderly woman's grateful smile reminded Harold of why they'd undertaken this difficult transformation. He noticed how other staff members nearby weren't just going about their duties. They were actively looking for ways to help, approaching anyone who seemed to need assistance. Michael appeared beside his grandfather's seat, dressed more casually than usual in a simple shirt and slacks. "The latest customer satisfaction reports just came in," he said, sitting down. "Would you like to see them?" Harold nodded, accepting the tablet his grandson offered. The numbers told a compelling story. Complaints about discrimination had dropped to 0 in the past week, while positive feedback had increased by 300%. But it was the personal comments that caught his eye. "Just had the most wonderful experience at Metropolitan International," one passenger had written. "I was traveling with my mother who has mobility issues, and the staff treated her like royalty. This is what air travel should be like." Another comment read, "I've never felt so welcome at an airport. As someone who doesn't travel often and always felt intimidated, the difference in atmosphere is incredible. The new training program is working well," Michael explained, pointing to another section of the report. "Every staff member has completed the initial sensitivity courses, and the ongoing mentorship program is showing promising results." They watched as a young man in work boots and dusty clothes approached the information desk. Harold held his breath, but he needn't have worried. The new desk attendant, who had replaced Sarah, immediately stood up with a welcoming smile. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" The man seemed surprised by the warm welcome. "I'm trying to find my gate, first time flying," he admitted sheepishly. "That's exciting. Let me walk you through everything you need to know," the attendant replied, coming around the desk to help him personally. Harold nodded approvingly. "Sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments," he mused. The airport's transformation went beyond just customer service. New signs in multiple languages had been installed, making navigation easier for international travelers. Rest areas were now scattered throughout the terminal, providing comfortable seating for elderly or tired passengers. A children's play area had been added, complete with a miniature control tower that delighted young travelers. But perhaps the most significant change was in the staff themselves. The fear-based, appearance-focused culture had been replaced by one of genuine care and attention. Security personnel now approached their duties with respectful vigilance rather than suspicious aggression. Customer service representatives were trained to look for ways to help rather than reasons to judge. A commotion near the main entrance caught Harold's attention. A group of farmers, still in their work clothes, had just entered the terminal. In the past, they might have received sideways glances or worse. Today, they were greeted warmly and efficiently guided to their check-in counter. "We've hired some of them part-time, you know," Michael said, following his grandfather's gaze. "Local farmers who want extra income during the off-season. Your idea about diverse perspectives is really paying off." Harold smiled, remembering his own farming days. "People who work the land know the value of patience and care. They understand that you reap what you sow." A familiar face approached, James, the janitor who had shown kindness to Harold during the test. He had been promoted to facilities supervisor, part of the airport's new policy of recognizing and rewarding staff who exemplified their values. "Mr. Chin," James greeted them both warmly. "The new employee break room is ready if you'd like to see it. We've made sure it's accessible to all staff, no more separation between management and ground crew." As they toured the new facility, Harold noticed small but significant changes everywhere. The security staff's new uniforms included name tags with How can I help you? In multiple languages. The airport's mission statement was prominently displayed throughout the terminal, not just as words on a wall but as a living philosophy evident in every interaction. Grandfather, Michael said as they completed their tour. We've received requests from other airports wanting to implement similar changes. They've heard about our transformation and want to learn from it. Harold nodded, watching as another elderly passenger was treated with genuine respect and care. Change is like a stone dropped in a pond, he said softly. The ripples keep spreading, touching shores we never expected to reach. As the morning sun streamed through the terminal's windows, Harold Shen sat back in his chair, satisfied. The test had been difficult, even painful, but necessary. Metropolitan International had become more than just an airport. It had become a model for how society itself could change, one interaction at a time. A young girl walking past with her mother pointed at Harold. That's him, isn't he? The farmer who owns the airport, she whispered loudly. Harold winked at her, and she grinned back. Yes, he thought, watching the busy terminal hum with its new energy of inclusivity and respect. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected teachers, and the greatest changes start with a single moment of truth.